Hello and welcome to this time of worship. Today we're here to celebrate the love of God and commit ourselves again to His service. And today we're going to be outside in the beautiful fall weather and enjoying some beautiful fall colors. And I invite you to enjoy worship in this manner online today. Next week we'll be in person and we will strive to be live streaming our service for you on Sunday morning. But this week we get to enjoy some nice fall colors. Next week we'll be inside the sanctuary. Hear this call to worship. Call on the name of God and give thanks. Make known God's deeds among the people. Sing and tell of God's wonderful works. Let those who seek God rejoice in their hearts. Let us worship God. Let's pray. Lord, who lifts us up, reside in our hearts today. Help us to listen closely for your word to us. Remind us that you are always with us. Throughout all of our lives, give us confidence in your presence so that we may go into your world ready to witness to your love through our works and our deeds. For we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
God created night and day with sun and moon to light the way, making sky and land and sea a playground fun and free. Then he filled the great big sea with fishy creatures for the deep. Animals, birds, and insects too joined in the Ultra Zoo. How awesome is that? Totally awesome is God. How awesome is that? Totally awesome is God. And with time, the seasons came, like summer heat and need for rain. Winter
The parable of the workers in the vineyard is found in Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About the third hour, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the same thing. About the 11th hour he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "Friend, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. This is the word of the Lord.
Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, we only want to hear your voice. We're hanging on every word. Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, we want to know you more and more. We're hanging on every word. 'Cause when you speak, when you move, when you do what only you can do, it changes us, it changes what we see and what we seek. When you come in the room, when you do what only you can do, it changes us, it changes what we see and what we see. Spirit of the living God. We only want to hear your voice. We're hanging on every word.
The scripture reading is taken from Philippians chapter 1, verses 21 to 30. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet, what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again your joy in Christ Jesus will overflow on account of me. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. This is the word of the Lord.
Yes, today I'm coming to you from my backyard because why not? I've been all around the MD, and today, why not stay home and preach to you from my yard? So here I am, and enjoying a beautiful fall afternoon, and it might be a little bit cloudy and a little bit smoky and hazy out here right now, but I am still thankful for this nice warm afternoon. I can recall this time a couple of years ago, maybe not this exact day, but right around this time of year, this was the scene in my backyard in September, mid to late September. And I'm more than thankful and happy to be out here on a cloudy and hazy day in my without a jacket on and enjoying a wonderful fall afternoon. It's a good day for farmers. It's a good time to see some colorful leaves, and it's a great time to consider Paul's words to the church in Philippi. Yes, we're moving out of Romans and into a few weeks in Paul's letter to the Philippian church. And I want to direct your attention to Philippians chapter 1, verses 21 to 30 today. And as we spend a few minutes thinking about Paul's words to the church in the Philippian church, I want you to imagine in your life, in your mind's eye, somebody who you regard as a wonderful example of what it means to live a fully devoted life to Jesus. Someone who embodies Paul's words in the early verses of our passage today, where he says, "To live is Christ." Who in your life can you think of that has embodied that phrase? Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's a stalwart pillar saint of the church, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's somebody you looked up to as a child, maybe it's someone who you currently know and look up to. And not only envision that person, but think about the characteristics of that person that make you think about them when you think about the phrase, "to live is Christ." What was it about that person that helps you, or makes you draw that connection? Probably they're not a person who brags about their relationship with God very much and thinks that they're holier than thou. It's probably somebody who displays some very unique characteristics. They're usually humble, probably somebody who studies the Word and has a vibrant prayer life, Maybe it's somebody who you would characterize as self-serving, somebody who's always giving. Maybe it's somebody who serves in the church or has served in the church. Maybe it's somebody who in your life has always shown kindness and graciousness to you. Whatever the case may be, those are likely some of the characteristics, and perhaps that person embodies all of those characteristics. And it is those characteristics that have led you to draw that line of connection when I've asked you to think about somebody who you think who embodies to live is Christ. Well, as you think about that, let's explore a little bit about what Paul has to say to the Philippian church in this opening chapter of his letter to them. Now, just a little bit of background information as we begin this journey through the letter to the Philippians. Paul is writing this letter to a church that he loves. It's a church that seems to be close to his heart, that he is very pleased with, that is doing good work and is doing a good job of living for Jesus in the place where they are, in the city of Philippi. And so this letter has a different tone than some of the other letters that Paul writes. Paul isn't really rebuking them or dealing with confrontations within the church. It doesn't seem like it's not a corrective. He seems to be writing a letter of encouragement to a church that he loves. And not only that, but Paul writes to this church while he's in prison. And the jury is out a little bit on this. Some scholars differ on where they think Paul is in prison, but generally the consensus seems to be that Paul is likely in prison in Rome while he's writing this letter. And because Paul is in Rome in prison, he's not living in a country club or in some sort of good circumstance. So that knowledge, that background knowledge that Paul writes this letter while he is suffering, while he is under persecution, while he is in prison for proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, he writes, it just makes these words that he writes to the Philippian church all the more powerful and even astonishing. And we'll get there in a few weeks, but when you consider that Paul is in prison while he writes these words, it makes the words of Philippians chapter 4, for instance, that more astounding. He says, in all things give thanks. And he expounds on the way to find peace. And we find that to be, good advice that we are familiar with from Paul, but I think it makes it even more remarkable that he writes those words while under less than ideal, to say the very least, circumstances while he's in prison. And in fact, the words that he speaks to us today are even so remarkable because of the circumstances under which they are written. Paul writes these words about to live is Christ, to die is gain, and he further encourages the Philippian church to live lives worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then he invites them into a participation in suffering. Well, that's something maybe we can understand coming from a man living and writing from prison. But these other words, to live is Christ, to die is gain, to understand the joy of serving and giving of oneself while incarcerated for doing just that, seems to be a remarkable turn of affairs, a remarkable statement, to say the least. And so, I want to spend some time thinking about those familiar words in this passage that was read to us today. Probably that this opening phrase, to live is Christ, to die is gain, is likely one of the most familiar parts of this passage that your ears would hear and my ears hear. The rest of it maybe not as familiar. And I want to spend a few minutes just exploring what to live is Christ, to die is gain might mean. What are some of the ramifications of that? And this is where I want you to pull up that image and the characteristics that surround that image of that person in your life, or those people in your life who you think exemplify this phrase, to live is Christ. What does to live is Christ mean? Is it a commitment to the spiritual disciplines? Is it an involvement in the life of the family, someone who devotes themselves to the church? Is it a giving of oneself in service? Is it, as we've already said, kindness and compassion and mercy and grace as the characteristics of that person's personality? Well, it's probably a yes to all of those things. Paul seems to understand that the Spirit permeates all the areas of his life and recognizes the Spirit's presence in every facet of who he is, not just in his study of the scriptures or in the way when he's preaching the gospel to those in the places that he's traveling in, but every area of his life, in his thought processes, in his attitude towards others, in even his ability to find satisfaction and meaning while he is incarcerated and living under persecution in prison. For Paul, to live as Christ is a statement that goes beyond recognizing the presence of Jesus in his life. It is a statement, in fact, of purpose. It is a statement that where Paul recognizes that he has found that living in relationship with Jesus infuses his life with meaning and gives purpose to his days and all of his actions. To live as Christ is a bold statement on living a life of fruitfulness. And let's get into that a little bit. You see, Paul elaborates on the phrase, to live as Christ, to die is gain, as he talks about giving of himself in service to the Philippian church. He talks throughout this passage of if he has the chance to get out of prison, he will devote himself to serving them. He'll go visit them, and he'll continue to try and encourage them and uplift them and build them up. And he's expressing this desire to continue to serve and live in this fruitful service right to the end. Now, when we hear these words, to live is Christ, to die is gain, sometimes we think about this in terms of an escapist viewpoint. If Paul has resolved that if he's going to live, that's great, he'll keep serving. But if he dies, well, that'll be good for him anyway, because he'll receive this reward for which he is anticipating. He'll go to be with Jesus in the arms of Jesus in heaven, and he's looking forward to this. And at this stage, while he's suffering in prison, maybe even to die and be freed from this burden of serving and giving, and freed from the suffering that he's endured, would seem like a welcome respite for him as he moves away from the suffering that he's enduring. But perhaps this is not an escapist vision that we sometimes would put onto this. You see, Paul doesn't really believe necessarily in a disembodied heaven where he will go and spend his time in the arms of Jesus for eternity as a disembodied spirit. So he's not looking to escape the reality of earth, or of his fleshly life, of his bodily life, in order that he might enjoy some disembodied time in the clouds with Jesus. That's not Paul's outlook on what happens after death. Paul is fervently and firmly committed to the belief that there will be a resurrection and that there will be a renewal and a recreation. We could call those the 3 R's of Paul: resurrection, renewal, recreation. And Paul is looking forward to one day rising from the dead, living on the renewed earth in relationship with God and his creation that has been renewed and restored and recreated. This is the work that God began in Jesus, and the work that will be finally complete when he comes again. This is Paul's firm belief, and so we don't believe that he is looking forward to some sort of disembodied state with God. So this is not a statement of escapism. That's a long-winded way down a rabbit trail explanation to say that Paul's not talking about escaping what's going on in this life. But perhaps he's saying something else. Because of Paul's deep belief in the resurrection, because Paul doesn't believe that to die is to simply go to heaven and live for eternity as a disembodied spirit, many believe that Paul has another purpose in talking about to die is gain, and his purpose in saying that may be to elaborate on this whole idea that he is committed to a fruitful service right until the end. For Paul believes that if he is to die in prison, he will go out swinging, he will go out preaching, he will go out proclaiming the good news, and even at the moment of his death, if he dies a martyr's death in Rome at the hands of the Romans in prison, his death would be glorifying to God. His life is glorifying to God right up into the end, and his death would serve as glorifying God by the way that he proclaims God's good news right to his very last breath. Paul is perhaps here explaining in ways that maybe we overlook his deepest commitment to being fruitful in his service to God right until the end. Yes, he has the opportunity, he believes, to magnify Jesus, and this is his statement on that. Now, as we envision somebody who embodies this phrase, to live is Christ, I don't know about you, but I generally envision someone who doesn't retire. Somebody who doesn't use the commonly held phrase, well, I've done my time and I'm done serving and I'm moving on. I'm going to let somebody more qualified or somebody younger, or you could fill in the blanks, do the work of living for Christ or proclaiming the gospel or serving the church or being kind and generous to others. I envision somebody who gives of themselves selflessly right all the way through. And we have numerous examples of this in our lives, I'm sure. I think about people in my life. I can remember my children's church teacher as a child, Mrs. Hepworth, who for years and years and decades I shouldn't say decades upon decades, I'm not even that old, but for decades served in that position faithfully and selflessly, and taught us kids about Jesus week in and week out on Sunday mornings, while the adults were in service, listening to the preacher and worshiping on their own. She gave of herself. She sacrificed this for years and years, and we never got the sense from her that she was going to retire from that work. This was her calling. This was her active service. This was her fruitful living for Jesus. Right now, I think about one of the general superintendents in the Church of the Nazarene, Dr. Jesse Middendorf, who retired many years ago from his role as general superintendent, but is not relaxing on a beach somewhere enjoying his retirement. No, he in fact is a strong voice for change and renewal and work within the Church of the Nazarene. He's speaking up for social issues and for being a real advocate for a change in attitudes for how we as a church address the social needs of the world that we're currently living in. He has engaged and continues to serve the church in this selfless manner as a fruitful to the end type of person. And this is what Paul is committing to. He's saying, if I live, I will come back and I will keep serving, but even if I die, I'll go out proclaiming the gospel. Paul is weary in prison. He's suffering, but he understands that it might even be better to stay and endure and persevere for the sake of the Philippian church. He's not looking to escape. And also that he understands that he, after his release from prison, wouldn't go off and live quietly so as not to risk being imprisoned again. No, he would go and serve. He would continue to give his life for the sake of the church, right to the end. This is a wonderful statement. And in fact, Paul's desire here to state that to live as Christ is to engage in fruitful living right until the end is further illustrated by actually what's going on in his life while he's in prison. Yes, he's writing letters of encouragement to the church while he's in prison. He's not just languishing in a prison cell somewhere, but also in this letter, it alludes at the beginning, at the end, and at the end to something that he's involved in even while he's in prison. He talks about the prison guards sending their greetings, and that he will give greetings to the house of Caesar. And there are many who believe that Paul is alluding to perhaps the idea that he's been ministering to those who are his captive, or not his captives, he's captive too, and the gospel is being preached, and perhaps lives are being changed by this message amongst the Roman guards, amongst those who are taking him captive. And he is actually being very productive, not just sending letters out, but working within the prison that he is incarcerated in. Paul is determined to be fruitful to the end. Paul ends this explanation of fruitful service as a life worthy of the gospel by including some troubling words about suffering. These are words we don't like to hear which actually are a little bit strange for us to hear when he says, you have the privilege of joining Jesus and joining with him in suffering near the end of this passage. What does he mean? I think that this is an example of the ramifications of living kingdom values. The reason why it's hard for us to hear these words is because we live very comfortable lives. We have like backyards and good weather, and we enjoy this type of living. And there probably is an overarching mentality that some of us may have that to live for Jesus is to kind of escape from some of the difficulties of life, to live a favored life, a blessed life, all of those sorts of things. But the gospel never promises an easy life or a life free from suffering or the troubles that come from this world. And the Philippian church was dealing with their own set of troubles. They were a church persecuted, and we'll get more into that as we delve more into this letter in the next few weeks. But to say the least, they understood what Paul was saying about joining in the sufferings for the cause of the gospel. They were being persecuted in their own way and living in difficult circumstances where they were. And Paul basically says, if you're going to live a fruitful life to the end, then perhaps you will endure some suffering in your life along the way. The ramifications of living kingdom values sometimes brings along suffering. Fruitful service isn't all rosy. It can have hardship attached to it. Paul is not in any way reveling in hardship or saying we should seek it out. He's just saying this is one of the ramifications of it. A recognition that to be fruitful to the end, to be involved in the redemptive work of the kingdom, puts God's people at odds with the values of the world around them. This is likely what the Philippian church was dealing with, as their lifestyle did not mesh well with the influencers within the city that they lived in. When we are participants in kingdom work, we play by a different set of rules and are guided by an alternate wisdom. We put the needs of others first, for instance. We don't work just for our comfort or stability alone. We're generous and self-giving. This fruitful service puts us in a place of self-giving that can also include being uncomfortable, and it can also include suffering, as putting others first sometimes doesn't deal with my own comforts. Putting the needs of others before myself sometimes makes me put my own needs on the back burner. Giving generously sometimes means I go without. Whatever the case may be, we have to understand that suffering and hardship and a lack of comfort is one of the things that Paul says comes with the territory when we're dealing with fruitful living to the end. He realistically acknowledged that being privileged to serve and participate in kingdom work will put us in positions that may not feel good all of the time. But this is what Paul is calling us to as he invites us into fruitful service, invites us into a life of meaning and purpose, as we find that our meaning is not tied up in the accolades or what we gain from self-giving, but our purpose and meaning is tied up in finding that our lives more and more resemble the self-giving Christ who lives and died for others. And this is what Paul has called us to do. This is fruitful service. And Paul has recognized that in this way, giving ourselves to others, we live a lifestyle worthy of the gospel, full of meaning and purpose, maybe pain and even suffering, but fruitful till the end.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save
receive this benediction today. Go forth into God's world as God's own children. Let the love of Christ be reflected in your life and your deeds. Go with joy to serve the Lord. Amen.